Chapter 2. Benny Again. The midday light poured through the large windows of the Edward Gilt Studios, bathing the space in surreal brilliance. The building, a low-slung single-story relic, stood resilient in the sleepy sprawl of Penetration, Michigan, as it had since it opened its doors on a sweltering August afternoon in 1964, the ribbon snipped by Edward Gilt himself. A local radio enthusiast, he dreamed of bringing the eclectic, often eccentric voices of the Great Lakes region to a wider audience. The studio served parent AM station 520 WRP, the Carp, at the beginning primarily, growing increasing syndicated content over the years. The Gilt, as it was called by early patrons, boasted state-of-the-art equipment for its time and a dizzying slate of programming. Weeknights featured Pop Lake Shuffle, a call-in show where listeners debated the hottest new pop records, while a panel of 3 local DJs, one of whom, Carl Crino, was famously allergic to vinyl, provided heated commentary. Saturday mornings were the domain of Benny Again, hosted by Benny McElroy, a charismatic angler who regaled audiences with both fishing tips and his often specific, explicit emotional awakenings, canoeing Lake Huron. In 1967, the station branched into regional rock with the Ampersands Hour, spotlighting emerging garage bands like the Stray Outboards and Huron Howl, whose jarring blend of surf rock and bagpipes drew both praise and confusion. The show became notorious for live interviews with intoxicated band members and the occasional amplifier fire. By the early 1970s, the schedule included soundtracks to the seasons, an avant-garde experiment that paired regional weather forecasts with eclectic musical interludes, ranging from classical violin to funk jams, designed to set the mood for impending rain or sunshine. It was in 1976 that Edward Gilt Studios found its permanent tenant and defining voice. Colonel Stephen Prather arrived with the fledgling Beyond the Near Horizon, short on cash and unable to return to his original station due to legalities never fully elaborated upon. Over time, the eclectic lineup of the early years faded away, leaving Beyond the Near Horizon as the studio's flagship program, broadcasting a singular vision of speculative inquiry. The Colonel would often admit himself that he remembered details more than facts, and that the years really did blend into one long journey, an expedition that he hadn't considered pausing yet. The hum of vintage recording equipment mingled with the slight creak of floorboards, a sound that always reminded Colonel Stephen Prather of an old ship straining against a calm sea. In 4 days they would be leaving the port of Manzanillo on seas they all hoped would be as forgiving. A pair of microphone booms extended toward the center console like watchful herons, poised to catch every nuance of Prather's voice. The Colonel leaned back in his chair, the light catching the edge of his meticulously pressed white shirt. His signature suspenders stretched across his chest, a sharp contrast to the faint streaks of dust on his elbows from a last-minute tumble with a faulty tripod. His gaze drifted momentarily to the windows, where the pines lining Penetration Avenue gave no hint that 4 miles east, the auxiliary trailer studio sat dormant for now, awaiting Stephanie's next introduction. "All right, cue me in," Prather called, his voice carrying the easy command of a man accustomed to performance. He adjusted his headset, pulling the microphone closer. The engineer, a slightly built man named Terry with a predilection for upcycle gum chewing, which often had him scanning city pavements or fondling the underside of desks, gave a thumbs up from behind the glass. The red light above the console flicked on, and Prather leaned into the microphone, his demeanor shifting effortlessly into that of the polished pitchman. "It will come as no surprise to those in the know that our entire ecosystem is collapsing before our eyes," he intoned, his voice measured and authoritative. According to analysis by the Bert and Janice Hund Foundation for Continuous Inquiry, government Wi-Fi and the global paternity leave cabal could decrease fishery yields by an astonishing 277% within a future 4-month period in a location to be determined. Prather glanced up as a low murmur of voices filtered into the room. Beyond the glass-paneled door leading to the hallway, 2 electricians gestured animatedly at each other, their silhouettes cast against the sunlit corridor. Add to this, Prather continued, his tone unwavering despite the growing commotion, normally verdant areas like Barrow, Alaska, Dalanzadgad, Mongolia, and Alice Springs, Australia, have seen their booming agricultural industries suddenly and sharply decline. One of the electricians, a wiry man with a tool belt weighed down by wrenches and electrical tape, threw his arms wide in exasperation. His counterpart, a stockier figure in a faded jumpsuit, jabbed a finger toward the ceiling, his voice rising in protest. Prather's gaze flicked to Terry in the control booth, who responded with a helpless shrug. The fact is that without food, we're going to have to be tougher than ever to survive. Prather pressed on, his voice rising slightly to drown out the muffled argument. But where do we go? The wiry electrician grabbed a clipboard from a nearby desk, shaking it with the fervor of an overworked accountant. The other crossed his arms, his expression a mask of stubborn defiance, stamped with a wide, dark mustache that was only missing an event horizon. Prather's rhythm faltered for the briefest moment, then resumed. Discredited astronomer Carl Sagan once suggested that we were composed of star stuff, Prather declared, his voice imbued with mockery. But anyone with a sense of logic and distance realizes that Mother Earth is a lot closer than even our own beloved sun. The taller electrician made a sharp, sweeping gesture toward the break room, where the refrigerator's compressor had begun to hum ominously. The shorter man responded by pointing toward the dimming streetlights visible through the windows. Terry hit the intercom button. "Colonel, you want me to—" Prather waved him off, his focus unbroken. "As for myself," he continued, leaning closer to the microphone, "I happen to agree with retired Italian politician and friend of the show Petri Portico, who said it best when he stated, based on all available information, it is clear that there is some kind of association between humanity and the planet Earth." A sudden clang echoed through the hallway as a toolbox tipped over, spilling its contents across the floor. Wrenches and screwdrivers fluttered outward like fish on the deck of a trawler at the feet of the men, who were swinging wildly at each other, curiously both with open hands. Terry winced, glancing nervously toward the colonel, but Prather didn't flinch. "For that and many other reasons," Prather announced, his voice rising with conviction, "I was thrilled to learn about Terra Force Essence." Then, in a miraculous moment, the men lowered their arms and seemed to gaze at each other. Prather was intrigued, but occupied. "With Terra Force Essence, at last we can finally harvest the pure, raw energy straight from the source. The moment you hungrily gulp the vanilla cream or strawberry tart packets mixed with the liquid of your choice, your life changes forever, burrowing straight through to the new you with help from the fitness mining expertise of TFE. The shorter electrician yanked open the breaker panel with a metallic screech and pointed mysteriously to his chest. "Touch the limits of human endurance when you channel the fiery energy of cinnabar, infused with Mercury's primal force. Only the strongest of your cells will be left after a deep exfoliation powered by the ancient might of serpentine." He glanced toward the control booth, where Terry was furiously adjusting knobs to filter out the background noise. "Galena, rich in healing, mystical lead, grounds you with the Earth's raw elemental power, tempering your body like ancient warriors of the past." His voice swelled, punctuated by a thud as the taller electrician slammed the breaker panel door. "And good news for sufferers of constipation," he added with a touch of levity, "nothing stops this stuff from coming through the turnstile, so you can wave goodbye to those bodily blockades." When he looked again, a third man, alarmingly red-faced and weeping, who seemed to be in his 80s, entered the conversation, threatening to destroy the fragile peace. Visit SpanishImpotenceCure.com for more information, including pricing on the next International Waters Taste Testing cruise. With a final flourish, he leaned back in his chair, the failing metal bones popping like fireworks to celebrate the end of his pitch. Terry gave him a thumbs up through the glass. Prather removed his headset, his expression one of practical serenity. Beyond the glass-paneled door, the first two electricians were now demonstrating something to the older, weepy man, the shorter one now gesturing toward the refrigerator in the break room. Prather watched them for a moment, his brow relaxing slightly, then turned to Terry. "Let's hope Terra Force Essence can fix the wiring too," he muttered. Yuri pressed his left headphone tight to hear the end of the spot against the impatient rain pattering against the tent wall. The colonel's small voice closed. "Visit SpanishImpotenceCure.com for more information, including pricing on the next International Waters Taste Testing cruise." Hunched over the battered mixing console, with an oval sticker reading Jericho beneath the dim light of the second smaller catering tent, he twisted a dial with practiced precision. The transition was seamless as the uneasy synth strains of the show's bumper music swelled, filling the airwaves with nostalgic suspicion. He flicked a switch, activating the mic relay, and leaned closer, his voice low and deliberate. "Stand by, Colonel." "Live in 5, he said, his thick accent cutting through the stubborn whine in the transmission. He let the music swell for another moment before fading it just enough to cue Prather's return, his hand hovering over the console like a conductor waiting for the downbeat. The racing wind outside the tent had risen to a near roar, and the canvas walls facing seaward danced a coordinated undulation. The nearby complaints of the reinforced poles holding the structure together provided a tenuous rhythm to the soundscape. Prather focused on a patch of the microphone's metallic crosshatch. "All right, folks," he began, his voice cutting cleanly through the ambient din. "Welcome back to the Apocalypse Roundtable at Christmas Island. Not sure how much the mics are picking it up, but it is really starting to howl out there." He paused, his head tilting as if considering the unseen elements beyond the tent. "We probably ought to go check on Enoch at the next break." Pastor Tamor Fawn-Ferrier's bleary eyes lifted from his folded hands, his forehead creased with confusion. "Is that your son?" he asked, his tone soft but uncertain. Prather blinked. "Enoch Price, Pastor. The author. That's his chair right there." Fawn-Ferrier's gaze followed Prather's gesture to the empty seat, his expression softening into one of peculiar admiration. "You're a very attractive woman for your age," he murmured earnestly. Prather replied without judgment. "Thank you." His glance flicked to syrupy raindrops tracing the tent's backbone, merging and slipping into the folds below. "Folks, get those questions ready. We'll be taking your calls not too long from now. Without delay, let's jump into some birthdays, though. Actor Jonah Hill is 29. Linda, was it his father or uncle that developed the rubella vaccine? Linda Prince Pine's lips pursed slightly as she leaned back in her chair, her cyan pantsuit crisp despite the humidity. "I'll take a step back, Stephen," she said, her voice even. "Hill is a Cortanian to begin with." Prather nodded thoughtfully. "From Cortani's prime in Andromeda. As the more informed of your listeners will know," Linda continued, "a lush and vibrant world." "Point of origin for those miniature corn cobs," Prather interjected. "Correct," Linda confirmed with a nodding smile. "Cortanians, as you may recall, have a talent for mimicry and an extraordinary knack for camouflage." Prather's expression puckered. "Okay, that would better explain the casting for the 21 Jump Street adaptation." "Naturally bioluminescent," Linda added. "This table makes me feel homicidal," the pastor declared flatly. "Noted." Prather made a small note on his pad. "That is fascinating," Linda said, deftly steering the conversation back. Jonah Hill, or Zyphor 7 as he was known on Cortanis Prime, was actually on a cultural exchange mission when his craft was clipped by a Chinese military satellite. "The Fan Hui Shi Weixing?" Prather asked. "You would think that," Linda replied, "but it was the Shijian 1. This collision sent Zyphor 7 careening away from his intended landing spot near Doha and into a suburban backyard in Oxnard, California. I squatted in Oxnard as a very young man," Fawn-Ferrier offered. Linda softly bit her lip, but continued. "A leak in the radium fuel mixture in the wreckage caused an involuntary transformation, and when the Hill family found him, he resembled a plump little cherub straight out of Rococo." "But why was he so bloody good in Superbad?" Fawn-Ferrier asked, leaning forward as though demanding an answer to a deeply personal mystery. "That's a good question," Prather mused. "Don't forget," Linda began, "that a Cortanian envoy had a hand in the script for Superbad. The McLovin ID scene in the liquor store, there's a sense of failure or gloom from the beginning. And Fogel is robbed, of course. This is very in line with the Cortanian principle of Pripthor's gambit, where one must face extreme odds with unwavering confidence, trusting that the universe will test their resolve through unexpected challenges. Far better than trading sexual favors for a fifth of Old Crow," Fawn-Ferrier remarked with a wistful sigh. "A lesson I shall never forget." Linda straightened slightly, her hands folding over the table. "Now consider Hill's performance. What do you—" Prather suddenly stiffened, his body snapping to attention as though jolted by electricity. He pressed a hand to his earpiece, his expression darkening with concentration. "Linda, hold on a second. What's that, Yuri?" His eyes widened slightly and he nodded. "Sure, patch him in." His tone shifted into one of brisk authority. "Linda, I'm sorry to interrupt. Enoch, this is Colonel Stephen Prather." Enoch Price's voice drifted into the tent, the connection wavering against the rising storm. "This is Price, Colonel," he began, his tone clipped but laced with a hint of strained civility. "I regret to inform you that I'm in quite the pickle here, old boy. The starboard side of this Series 11 porta-john has been broadsided by what appears to be a rogue mudslide from the nearby embankment. My escape route is completely blocked by the muck and mire of Neptune's own fury." Colonel Stephen Prather straightened slightly in his chair, his fingers drumming against the edge of the table. "Copy that, Enoch. Are you secure in your current position?" "For the time being, Colonel," Enoch replied, his words underscored by the close groan of the beleaguered portable toilet. "I've battened down the hatches as best I could. The door is braced with a tube containing a ream of discarded One Direction promotional posters. The stench of defeat in these contorted, precarious quarters is overwhelming." Linda Prince Pine leaned forward. "Enoch, can you see the horizon? Any sign of the storm abating?" "Negative, Linda. Visibility is near zero." "She's upright but listing dangerously to port," Enoch responded, the strain evident in his voice. Linda's expression tightened. "Enoch, I want you to clasp your hands around the Lyle Lovett amulet and repeat the following incantation." A pause crackled over the line before Enoch's voice returned, heavy with regret. "Linda, I'm afraid I have unfortunate news. Ironically, before this evil surge, I had placed good Lyle beside me in a location of relative safety. Or so I believed. When the quaking began, I watched in horror as he and his golden tether slid toward the mouth of hell. There was no saving him." Linda closed her eyes briefly, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm sorry, Enoch." Prather leaned into the mic, his tone attempting a faint cheer. "I may have a little bit of a silver lining. This is understandably mist in the dark out there right now, but the porta-johns were only there for the construction staff. We actually had a fantastic prefab facility with showers and commodes about 30 yards from where you're sitting." The line was silent for a beat, then Enoch's reply came, heavy with despair. "I feel the fool. If only I had the implements of seppuku with me to quench the shame." Prather chuckled faintly. "Good news is that you should see a flap. A trapdoor of sorts, under your feet in the porta-john." "Let's see here," Enoch muttered. A series of muffled sounds followed as he struggled with the flooring. "Yes, the opening seems to extend several feet downward into a ventilation system of some kind." "It's actually a propulsion channel," Prather explained. "The project foreman skipped out, but the plan was to put them to some kind of use. We'll never know now, but you can take that down into the boiler room under the actual latrine facility, Enoch. There's a rope ladder you can use from there to get to the commode and showers level." Enoch's voice carried a hint of reluctant interest. "Fascinating. I will endeavor to make my way down." "It's only about a 60-foot drop," Prather added with an almost conversational tone, "but I'd be prepared to do a little roll when you hit the bottom." An alarming groan reverberated through the connection, the sound of the porta-john's structure protesting against the relentless forces outside. "Oh, good God!" Enoch's voice rose sharply, teetering on the edge of panic. "She's giving way. It's now—" A sound like an ascending dragon, a deafening guttural roar that seemed to drag the air out of the room, ripped through the connection. Linda froze, her eyes widening as she clutched the edge of the table, the image of Enoch's precarious plight crystallizing in her mind. The line hissed violently, then fell silent. Prather stiffened, his hand instinctively going to his earpiece. "Enoch?" "Dagon it." A single raindrop slid from the tent spine and plopped onto the table with a dull, deliberate tap. Linda's voice broke the uneasy silence, soft but resolute. "Godspeed to him." Pastor Tamor Fawnferrier, unusually somber, tilted his head. "I wonder who will lead the little people of his village now." Drifted out in his Camden Borough vowels. "I thought he was living in Akron these days." Retaining pained confusion, Prather turned his attention back to the microphone. "Folks, we're going to break to pay some bills, but when we return, we'll take your calls on the higher plane hotline. That's 1-800-GET-HIGHER or 1-800-GET-HIGH-RR, 1-800-438-4477, if you're spelling it correctly, or 1-800-438-4444, if you're using the original Atlanta Children's Choir Guild number, subject of the federal narcotics cold case, for which I'm reminded to say that the Organism Consortium was cleared of any wrongdoing due to water-damaged evidence." He glanced in the direction of the sister tent, nodding through the canvas and rain at Yuri, whom he couldn't see. "Back with our continuing coverage of the end of human civilization when we return." 10,316 miles away, inside the Lost Anchor Tavern, a dark, warm, low-ceilinged bar sitting at the town limits of Penetration, Michigan. A group of regulars off of night shifts, some pretending to be, and all drinking through to the noon hour, sat hunched over the sticky pine counter atop mismatched stools, their eyes fixed on the subtitles on the above-the-bar television playing the UP Curling League Finals. A battered portable radio perched between bottles of Copper Queen vodka and Hammond's apple brandy provided the trebly current of Beyond the Near Horizon, humming through the room. Prather's voice rising and falling like the tide. Two windows at the corner sat filled with the boredom of a cold, grey, industrial intersection. "That man's out of his damn mind," muttered Eddie Leclerc, a retired dock worker nursing a whiskey neat. He jabbed a finger toward the radio as if addressing Prather directly. "Fishery yields down 277%. Idiot probably thinks a perch is something a bird sits on. Wonder what time it is out there where they are." Edward's sleepy voice bubbled out of his folded arms, nesting his forehead flat against the bar. At 7 foot and broad-shouldered, he was the largest man to ever frequent the Lost Anchor. He'd been off shift for 4 hours and had elected as his intoxicant of choice over the usual Budweiser. 12 hours ahead of us, or behind one of those, Mitchie offered, a patron and port engineer who, as was his custom, had cracked open the centipede cocktail cabinet to get it working again. On the wall above him, the Pabst Blue Ribbon sign washed his sprawling frame in pieces of stark white and crimson. Eddie bristled. "Christmas Island. I bet you they are in a motel room out there on 41 right now." Facing the patrons, Jessie Hunter leaned over her counter with confidence. She barely kept the Lost Anchor afloat and was constantly on patrol for opportunity. "Money where your mouth is, Eddie?" Eddie's bushy eyebrows rose skeptically. "You've taken all my damn money. You getting your news from him now, Jess?" "Not exclusively," Jessie shot back, smirking. At the far end of the bar, an older man named Carl, who only answered to whiskers, slammed a $10 bill onto the counter. "Alexander Hamilton says he'll bring up the chupacabra in the after-commercial." "Mr. Price is what they gotta think about," chimed in Pete Shirt-Tail Grayson, a construction foreman short of stature with a deep love for wild conspiracies. That did not sound good. "Shirt, I swear," Eddie barked a laugh, shaking his head. "What are you doing here if you think the world is about to end?" Jessie froze mid-paw, her eyes narrowing. "I'll take that bet, Shirt." "Got that right," Eddie groaned, slumping back in his chair. "And he's stolen valor, that guy. He didn't serve in any branch." Shirt-Tail urgently defended sacred territory. "It's an honorific. He's been very upfront about that." "Give me a break," Eddie dismissed the defense. "Horrific more like it." The foreman now rotated his stool towards Eddie. "From the people of the Yemen Arab Republic, out of gratitude for his role in constructing the Ali Abdullah squash court in the Plaza of the Kings." "Jess needs to cut you off," Eddie celebrated this line with a careful sip. Whiskers waved the others down along the bar. "Shh, he's back. We're going to check in with Enoch Price in a while here for his progress through the underground infrastructure for our temporary installation here on Christmas Island." Eddie peeled his eye at Carl with a nauseated expression. "Come on, chupacabra," the old man chanted under his breath.